Bandai WonderSwan is a truly fascinating game system. Being the final concept of Nintendo legend Gunpei Yokoi, it's got quite a number of things going for it. For one, games could be played in either landscape or portrait alignment. Some games were developed to take advantage of both of them. Another thing it had going for it was the strong third-party support it had, which included Capcom, Namco, and especially Squaresoft, who were just fresh off their bridge burning with Nintendo. The WonderSwan line only had a 4-year run, but was recognized for not only having some unique potential, but also getting a good chunk of market share before the Game Boy Advance released. After 199 games between the original and color successor, the WonderSwan line would see its 200th and final game release at the end of May 2004. It is often cited as one of the best games on the system, but the circumstances of its release give it a special title indeed, the Holy Grail of the WonderSwan. That game is Dicing Knight. But does it truly live up to its reputation? Well, I played through the entire game to find out. But before I start talking about it, if you think this video ended up turning out to be worth your time, please consider subscribing and sharing this video to those who you think might be interested. Any support is appreciated, and I thank you in advance if you do so. This is Dicing Knight, sometimes known as Dicing Knight Period, released exclusively for the WonderSwan color on the last day of May 2004. The game's existence owes itself to the Wonder Witch, an official software development kit designed for amateur programmers who wanted to make a WonderSwan game of their own in the C language. At the same time, a competition known as the Wonder Witch Grand Prix was hosted between 2001 and 2003, with the very best Wonder Witch developed games getting a potential physical release. Dicing Knight was the 2002 winner. I need to give a quick note about the WonderSwan hardware before I start really getting into this game, because the WonderSwan is such an unusual system that this needs to be addressed. While the WonderSwan is capable of playing games in both portrait and landscape mode, this game is always in landscape mode by the way, the refresh rate often causes problems with recording. At the time of the WonderSwan's release, the standard refresh rate was 60 Hz in Japan, a standard that remains to this day. The WonderSwan, on the other hand, has an unusual 75 Hz refresh rate. This means playing, much less recording WonderSwan games can be rather difficult for some people. You see, a monitor's refresh rate is practically tied to how many frames per second it's capable of showing. 60 Hz means it's capable of 60 frames per second, although normally it's a slight tad under that. Have you ever wondered why 59.9 something is considered a common FPS integer? This is why. With the WonderSwan being 75 Hz, a 60 Hz monitor means screen tearing can be common. All the game footage you see here actually is at 75 Hz, as I have a specialized screen capable of handling it. In addition, YouTube always sets its videos to 60 FPS in maximum, so even though I say this is 75 Hz gameplay, the footage won't be as smooth as it actually is. Now that I've shooed the technical elephant out of the room, let's talk about Dicing Knight. Dicing Knight at its core is a roguelike dungeon crawler. The game has 5 total dungeons ranging from 3 to 12 floors tall. When you pick one, the loading is a generating floor. The goal for each dungeon is to beat down enough enemies on that floor until a floor key drops, then find the door that leads to the next one. Open the door at the top floor and you engage in a boss fight that you need to take out. Believe it or not, this game actually has a story which is detailed in its manual. Once upon a time, there was a land of dreams and illusions. One day, a bunch of wicked dragons came in and nuked everything. The country's princess, Jongalaya, lamented the destruction and summoned a knight from another world to try to get revenge on them. The knight could not return until all the dragons were taken out, but even though the knight had the dicing sword, they were dumbfounded by the situation. Even if the dragons would be taken out, the country was not going to come back, and to top it off, the knight's stomach was growling. Regardless, they set off to hunt the dragons. Outside the title screen and a single cutscene at the end of the game, this is pretty much all you get. Not that any of it means much anyway, since most of the story isn't tied to the gameplay itself. Speaking of the gameplay, it's actually pretty good and utilizes all the WonderSwan's buttons. A attacks, B brings up the shield to block attacks, the X buttons move your character, and the Y buttons are your inventory slots. When you start a dungeon, you always begin with a heal potion. Once again, your goal is to get the floor key so you can move on to the next floor, but before then, there's some other items you can get. You have the dice for C, which shows your next 12 dice rolls, an invincibility potion, which makes you immune to damage for a short while, the time stop, which stops everything for a short while, the fortune, which at first I thought increased your drop rate, but actually turns all your dice rolls into 6s. The drill arm, which tears down the dungeon's walls, and finally the onigiri, which restores half your food gauge. Right, the food gauge. I need to explain a couple mechanics. The food gauge is essentially your time limit for the dungeon. Having the shield out drains it faster, so you can't just hold B all the time. If it goes dry, your HP will drop at a rate of 1 per second until either you use an item to refill it or get knocked out. While the onigiri does refill half the gauge, it only shows up when you have less than half the gauge available. The invincibility potion and fortunes also give a minuscule amount of the gauge, which may help in a pinch. When it comes to items, there's no way to drop anything. If you have a full inventory, you must use an item before you get something else. The only exception is the onigiri, which is used immediately. There's also this dice gauge. The higher that dice number is, the bigger the combo you can pull against one enemy. Also, if the dice gauge is higher than 1, you have the opportunity to use one of 2 special moves. To use a special move, you have to press both the A and B buttons, but it's a little peculiar on how they actually work. Pressing B before A activates Blazing Edge, a single target attack that uses 1 dice charge. A before B, on the other hand, is Shine Slash, which uses the entire dice gauge to blow up everything within vicinity. The dice gauge is restored by simply attacking and blocking special attacks. All of the game's boss fights are in the style of a bullet hell. Each boss fight has 3 phases, and you have 30 seconds to take out the health gauge for that phase. As long as you survive, you will move on to the next phase, but you must take out the boss in the 3rd phase in order to get your prize. The prize in question? A lottery ticket and a silver star indicating you conquered the dungeon. The lottery tickets are used to pick up orbs to power yourself up. The game starts you at level 0, which is unusual but not unheard of. With each level up, you gain an orb slot up to your max level of 9. There are 7 types of orbs you can pick up, as well as a bomb that may drop in the lottery that just blows everything up. Red is attack up, which increases the dice gauge up to a max of 5. You only need 3 reds to make this happen. Orange is defense up, which reduces the number of enemy dice that may drop when you take a hit by 1. These are mostly useful for the endgame, but they don't show up often. Green is regen, and this is where it gets interesting. If you have one attached and stand still in the dungeon for a few seconds, you'll enter a healing mode where you restore HP at the cost of your food gauge. This can allow for a tactic that lets you stay in the dungeon for much longer. Whenever an onigiri drops, the tactic goes like this. Stand still in the room, enter healing mode, and whenever you max out your HP or completely drain the food gauge, grab the onigiri and continue on. It's definitely something to learn in terms of taking on longer dungeons. Blue is the item drop rate. Self-explanatory. Purple is food max up, which doesn't look noticeable at first since the food gauge doesn't change, but it does slow down the rate it decreases. Black is experience rate up. Once again, self-explanatory. And finally you got white, which is HP up. Having one attached gives you a yellow health bar, followed by a blue, and then numbers from that point on, up to a max of 360 if you're crazy enough. However, with 9 white orbs, that should be 400 max. Well, here's the problem. When you max out the character, your final orb slot does not work. Yeah, I managed to figure that out by putting a sole green orb in that particular slot and did a certain run, and I could not get into healing mode whatsoever. So, for all intents and purposes, you've got 8 orb slots to use. Once you start the second dungeon, you're going to want to find a floor map, which will spawn pretty quickly and covers the entire floor. If you don't get it, you'll be running around in the dark. There's also gates that can spawn that require secondary gate keys, assuming you don't have a drill arm to just break through the walls. Opening gates does bring up the food gauge a bit, so it may be worth hunting them down. In addition, a couple rarer drops may start to appear at this point. These include extra lottery tickets, the exit wing, which brings you to the next floor, the super drink, which fully restores the food gauge, and the ultra life, which can either revive you for 20 HP if you're KO'd, or you can use it for a straight 40 HP heal. That's pretty much everything that there is to say about what's within the game itself. The difficulty of the dungeons can be explained like this. The first one is a piece of cake and gives you a chance to figure out how the game works. Item drops are also very frequent and the enemies are pretty easy. I forgot to mention, when you pick up the floor key, enemies will respawn in every room you access until you use it on the door to get to the next floor. If you know what you're doing and your drops are lucky enough, you can reach level 2 or even 3 before you're done with the dungeon. The second dungeon is also fairly easy, although now you're required to get the floor map and maybe some gate keys. You're also introduced to the Skull Gods, which put simply is the one enemy type you cannot actually destroy, so they're pretty obnoxious. The game's rarer drops will also start to appear in this dungeon. In short, this is where the game really starts to show its true colors. The third dungeon is much of the same, only with an extra floor and tougher enemies to fight. If you haven't picked up a defense orb yet, you might want to consider getting one before tackling this dungeon. The fourth dungeon adds a darkness effect, which means you can only see through a certain distance. The only way to dispel this effect is to get the floor key. Before that, you really are running around in the dark. And then you've got the final dungeon, and this is where everything just takes a nosedive. To start with, the music track for the dungeon is easily the worst in the game, being a very obvious and obnoxious 10-second loop. There are right ways to make a short music loop, and there are wrong ways to make one. This is the latter. The second big problem is that the overall floor size is much smaller than usual. This could mean that even if you're playing perfectly, there's a chance you might get screwed over and you have to reload the entire dungeon. Yeah, this final dungeon is not exactly pleasant. If you manage to take out the boss here, you get the game's only cutscene, a new character, and a bonus dungeon. Playing as the Fortuner has quite a number of gameplay differences. Your attack is turned into a projectile attack that does eat the food gauge. The B button, instead of a shield, throws a cross at a cardinal direction and consumes a dice charge. Throw it in the right position and it could do some massive damage. Just like the Knight, the Fortuner has two special attacks that require both the A and B buttons to be pressed. First is Absolute Feel, which dispels enemy projectiles on the screen, but also clears out whatever special effect may be active on you. The other is Rosencreuz, which is similar to Shine Slash and requires the cross to be out. It's not really easy to trigger, but it tears everything apart. As a counterbalance for having only projectile attacks, however, every enemy has at least a fireball attack. Everyone! The common items also function differently. Time Stop is significantly longer, and just about all of them fill the food gauge. When you take out a boss as the Fortuner, the silver star becomes a gold star. Take out the final boss, and no special treatment, just your last gold star and you're technically done. Well, except for the bonus dungeon anyway. The bonus dungeon is called Ouroboros, and true to its meaning, the dungeon is 999 floors. Obviously, this thing's not going to load in one sitting, so things function kinda differently here. The dungeon generates a single floor rather than the entire dungeon. Also, under normal conditions, if you get taken out in a dungeon, you start back on the floor before you got taken out. In this one, you start back on the same floor, but it regenerates. Other than that, you just face progressively tougher enemies until you reach the 21st floor, where you face the same 6 enemies the rest of the way. It's boring as hell, and you're going to be hoping for drill arms and exit wings because it's usually the longest, most obnoxious route to the exit. Apart from a single comment in some forum I can't even remember, I don't know of anybody that actually really talked about the depths of this dungeon, so I took on the challenge. Not surprisingly, this was a massive, tedious undertaking. Just to find out what happened at the end of 999 because nobody else really mentioned it, it set me completing this video back by over 5 months. For points of reference, I started playing this game for the purpose of making this video on the 30th of May. I completed my conquest of the game outside of Ouroboros on the 18th of June, taking right at 14 game hours to do so. I recorded the first floor of Ouroboros 3 days later. I took on Ouroboros with the intention of going up so many floors per day almost every day and hoped to reach the top before the year was over. With everything else that went on behind the scenes, some cases just to prevent burnout or going completely insane, I would not make it to 999 until the 24th of November. It took me over 77 game hours just to get up here. The rest of the game took only 14. The dungeon is also where I noticed the experience system not working as intended. Even though the experience counter is capable of showing 6 digits, the game actually reloads at the 16-bit integer of 65536. Within the last 150 floors, it would glitch out even more. Anytime I started back where I left off and used my first floor key, it would freeze up at 16959. No matter what I did, the experience counter would stay stuck there until I used my next floor key, at which point it would fix itself. Eventually, after a long streak of tenacity and not burning myself out, I would reach the top floor. I got the final floor key and opened the final door. First off, Ouroboros actually does end here, which means in essence I broke through the endless cycle. Second and more importantly, there's an extra image featuring the Knight in the Hot Spring if you make it all the way here. If you open the last door as the Fortuner, the image remains the same. As a side note, I cut this image in half because I was a bit concerned about the bottom half potentially getting the video flagged. Better safe than sorry. At the top is another message. Good work! Get some rest, haha. If only I could. So, was it worth climbing up this thing for 5 months? Yes, if only to say that I may be the very first one to even cover this point. Everybody else on YouTube I've seen cover this game only covered the main section and maybe a couple floors of the bonus dungeon. If you had ever been curious about what happens at the end of Ouroboros, you're welcome. Now that I've covered the game, let's talk about the game's general status as the Holy Grail of the WonderSwan. Dicing Knight's case is rather justified, being an indie title that managed to get a physical release. Nowadays, an indie title getting a physical release on modern systems is relatively commonplace. But back around the turn of the millennium, this kind of thing happening, home console or handheld, was fairly rare. Dicing Knight was the winner of an officially sanctioned competition and got rightly rewarded for it. However, what many may forget about this game is that it wasn't the only build of it. There are 4 of them. The first was the original 2002 Grand Prix entry. Believe it or not, this first version of the game is still available as a free download in the form of a Wonder Witch program on the competition's website. The second is the 2003 Grand Prix cartridge release, known as the Nakano build. This version was only available in the competition's in-house showcase event, which from what I could gather points to the 19th of July 2003. Not many were produced, obviously, being a promotional thing and all. The highest number I could find in terms of copies made was 50. The release status of the Nakano build is similar to that of the first 5 Toho games on the PC-98, which were only sold at Comic-Con between 1996 and 98, the last of them ironically being the final PC-98 game released. The third is the most well-known version, that being the Period build. This version was published by the Wonder Witch developers outright and was only available by mail order. Once again, Dicey Knight had a limited production. The 2001 Grand Prix winner got the same treatment earlier in the year and had a limited print run of 500 copies. Knowing that, Dicey Knight Period could not have had any more than 500 produced. The last version is Dicey Knight Legion, intended as a demo version of Dicey Knight Period. Just like the original build, it's also a free download. So in total, Dicey Knight has 4 different builds and roughly 550 physical copies running around. Being a very English-friendly WonderSwan game to boot, and there's a reason this game commands a 4-figure price tag whenever it shows up. For those actively hunting it, it's one of those games where there's not so much a stable market as it is how much are you willing to pay. With how rarely a copy shows up even online, getting one is no easy task. So with everything said and done, does Dicey Knight deserve its reputation, and is it worth the hassle to play today? Despite its endgame problems, absolutely. The game's infamous rarity more than justifies its general status as the Holy Grail of the system, and is an absolute treat to play. It also gets massive bonus points for being a very English-friendly WonderSwan game despite being an action RPG. I should note that Dicey Knight did get an English translation in January 2007, however the only things that required translating was the text before the title screen and the game's only cutscene. You can do fine without it. Regardless, it really does deserve its reputation as one of the standout titles for the WonderSwan line. If you're looking into diving into the WonderSwan, Dicey Knight is a game that must be played, no questions asked. But going for a physical copy? To quote Smash TV, good luck, you're gonna need it. Hey everybody, Eclipse14 here, thanks for watching. Sheesh, 6 months to make this video. Well, that's what happens when 5 of them required me to go through no man's land. Well, at least it's over and done with, and I can finally move on to some other games. If you like what you saw, though, feel free to drop a like, and if you think my work is worth your time, please subscribe. It would be very much appreciated. I think that's all I've got to say, so thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.